I grew up in the North among what many would consider to be macho, manly men. These are the kind of men fetishized by urban, off-grid, back-to-the-land, so-called libertarians. Men's men, they're called. These men were rough, tough, rugged individuals. The men I grew up with were flannel-clad, smelly, they were covered in scars, some were missing fingers and arms. These men eschewed safety gear and decried workplace precautions for being, quote, too soft. These men wanted the world to know they weren't scared of anything or anyone. The men I grew up with handled toxic chemicals with their bare hands, breathed in noxious fumes, and were cavalier and freewheeling in the handling of dangerous equipment, instructions, regulations, books, doctor's advice? Nah. They had absolutely no use for any of that muck. Many of these men spouted conspiracy theories, were fearful of doctors, teachers, and book learning. These men were often dirty, violent, and frequently seriously ill. I used to think the men in my rural backwards town were simply ignorant, cut off from civilization. I worked so hard to leave that place and find somewhere in Canada where people embraced collectivism, mutual support, medicine, and learning above all. I wanted to be somewhere safe from these kinds of rugged, macho men. I wanted civilization. But I don't think I ever found it. Today, I see white-collar men in workplaces deride masking, proudly flouting any safety precautions, while raw-dogging stale air in indoor spaces, all while demanding others toughen up, show up, unprotected, to dangerous, crowded spaces. Long-term health risks? Be damned. Unfortunately, I well understand the fate of these macho men from my years living northern, rural, and remote. I know how macho men's stories end. The men I grew up with had Middle Ages style lifespans. They died in their 40s and early 50s due to accidents, exposure to the elements, and preventable diseases. Today, many of the men I grew up with who survived wheel around oxygen tanks while struggling to breathe. I had thought these kind of macho men were a thing of the past until I read deeper into a Lancet article, and I see that they are in every level of power and in government. The front page story of the Lancet is a stinging indictment of the Boris Johnson government's decision-making that resulted in the deaths of nearly 250,000 UK citizens. This macho culture of number 10 Downing Street translated into politicians and their advisors, quote, laughing at the Italians, according to testimony given by Helen McNamara, who was Deputy Cabinet Secretary. These macho men of the Boris Johnson government remained supremely confident that the UK would be world-beating at conquering COVID-19. This is our fate right now. We have macho men who are in charge of our workplaces, who demand we show up with no common sense public health mitigations in our institutions, in our children's schools, and in our workplaces. We're getting sick over and over again, all in the service of this machismo, macho belief that safety equipment, public health mitigations are too soft, and that we have to, in order to show our fealty to these organizations, get sick over and over again. Thanks for listening.